we're going to talk about all those developments and the way in which financial crime is evolving, and also how are the banks now tackling those emerging challenges and emerging trends. So I have got three of my guest chief executive officers from various banks. So I'll start the proceedings with Aurangzeb Saab. And Aurangzeb Saab, my question to you is largely with respect to the way in which our economy is progressing or economy is regressing, the way in which you obviously see this. And there have been a lot of indicators with respect to economic vulnerabilities, political uncertainties, and also we are facing some geopolitical instability. And all of this is causing a significant impact on various macroeconomic indicators. And with this, obviously, we are seeing that the financial crime landscape is very significant, is evolving very rapidly. So, obviously representing one of the largest banks in Pakistan, what is your view on the changing landscape of financial crime in Pakistan with respect to business strategies and the compliance risk management strategies and financial crime risk management strategies as well? So, your thoughts, please, on this, Aurangzeb sir.
Thank you, Faraz. Or I would also like to thank the organizers to have invited me. देखिए, आपका जो आपने सवाल पूछा है वो एक्चुअली दो different questions हैं. The first one is with respect to the current situation, and there's no doubt about that we are in a perfect storm because of the confluence of factors that you have just mentioned. So I'm not going to repeat those. लेकिन देखिए, the banking industry continues to step up the way we stepped up during the COVID period. Because at one point in time, 1/3 to almost 50% of the physical network was closed. But the banking industry moved seamlessly in terms of the virtual offer. और वही चीज़ अब हम इसको आगे लेकर जा रहे हैं. Because अगर आप पिछले 18 महीने देखें, IMF on, IMF off, and the economic stress which comes out of it. And then, of course, the devastation around the floods that you have mentioned. And the banks have kept the show on the road in terms of financing. ये मैं नहीं कह रहा, ये अभी जो statistics आए हैं Q4 के, in terms of how the private sector lending has gone up. So, and number one. Number two, to the extent that we can help the exporters, importers, we have kept the trade business going. Now, having said that, this is not sustainable. If this situation continues, and this uncertainty continues to go for the next few months, my own sense is we are going to look at systemic risk for the banking industry. And that would be a big blow to this economy. अभी आपने President साहब को सुना है, timely decisions, timely execution. छोटा से छोटा इदारा हो, बड़े से बड़ा मुल्क हो. Timely decisions, timely execution. We are not going to graduate from the IMF program. We are into EFF Part 1. Whoever comes back after the elections, जैसे अभी President साहब ने कहा, we don't care who comes back after the elections, will have to deal with the IMF as they go forward. There's going to be EFF Part 2. We need to internalize that. We need to internalize that, and we need to understand, especially around the structural reforms. It's in the best interest of the country, and we should pay heed to it. And all the stakeholders should make the right decisions around it. तो ये situation है जी कि banking industry जो कुछ कर सकती है वो इस वक्त कर रही है और हम इंशाल्लाह करते रहेंगे. Now let's come to the second part of your question कि what does that actually mean for the financial crime regime. तो पहली तो सबसे अच्छी खबर है, मैं सुबह के आपसे सेशन में नहीं था, लेकिन जो FATF से हम निकले वाइट लिस्ट पे हैं, वो कि हमेशा कहते हैं कि getting to number 1 is easier, staying number 1 is more tough. तो अब हमारा जो collectively हमने जो काम करना है is around sustainability. And this is not just the banking industry, it's law enforcement agencies, it's our judicial system. All of us have to work together to ensure we stay on the white list. अब इसमें जो factors banking industry ने देखने हैं from my perspective, उसमें 3 या 4 different factors हैं which are going to define the financial crime regime. Global standards, those are there and they are evolving. उसमें FATF है, उसमें एंटी ब्राइबरी है, उसमें ESG है, उसमें अब नाउ फिनटेक है, फिनटेक की बात हो रही थी, ब्लॉकचेन है. So these are global standards which are evolving. Then there are global threats: wars, the geopolitics, embargoes, sanctions. Then closer to home, the geography that we live in, especially now on the western border. The evolving trade-based money laundering situation, given the disturbing situation there, we all need to be watchful. And then the fourth thing is our own internal structures, how we are organized, how we do things. So inka jo amalgamation hai is going to continue to define the emerging financial crime regime, और उसमें हमें एक risk-based approach सब बैंकों को ले रहे हैं और हमें लेनी पड़ेगी. अब उसमें इसका जो main discussion है वो ये है कि in terms of the inherent risk of the country, that will remain high, given all the factors that I've just mentioned. What we need to collectively as bankers ensure that we put enough compensating controls so that जो residual risk है, उसको हम manage कर सकें. अब उसमें दो चीज़ें हैं, and then I'll just wrap up because my worthy peers are waiting for your further questions. वो compensating controls क्या हैं? पहला तो ये है कि आप AML को strengthen करें, transaction monitoring को strengthen करें, sanctions को. So everything around, all our compliance colleagues who are doing their level best to get this thing going. But the fundamental thing is know your customer. ये KYC को हम समझते हैं कि ये tick the box. No, this is the first line of defense. If we get the first line of defense doing the right thing, ताकि ना वो कचरा आए, because it's kachra in, kachra out, right? So we have to be very clear what is actually coming onto our balance sheet, what's coming onto into the banking system. So the first line of defense, as far as I'm concerned, as far as my bank is concerned, for me, that is the most important thing. And the second thing is the role of technology, जो सारी आप लोग बातें करते रहे हैं. The way the transaction volumes are going up and all of that, we cannot continue to throw more bodies at it. So technology का जो role होगा उसमें AI भी है, उसमें bots भी हैं, ताकि जो analysis है और जो data gathering है, those should be done through bots. And then we have our AML analysts who should then continue to look at whatever the recommendations are coming through, and then those make those decisions. So I think in terms of compensating controls, these are going to be two very important elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurangzeb Sahab. And I think you talked about the country-level compensating controls and country-level risk assessments. And I happened to speak with a few of the compliance chiefs and compliance heads, and they have been talking rigorously about the fact that the country is undergoing a national risk assessment exercise, and there is a dire need for all the compliance stakeholders and the other stakeholders, obviously naturally, to be a part of that exercise, so that as a country we present a holistic picture of the profile of the risk that the country's new dynamics present, and the kind of then we can decide which types of controls we can adopt for addressing those risks at the country level, or perhaps maybe we can delve that down to the individual organizational levels and the industry like banking and non-bank industries. So thank you very much for your response, Aurangzeb Sahab. Now over to you, Shahzad. You have been a proponent of financial crime in your institution, within the industry, and you have done a lot of work with respect to your organizational transformation. My question is predominantly regarding the point that Aurangzeb Sahab has also mentioned, the sustainability, the sustainability of the country within the grey list. So I'll make a presentation after this important session, and I'll also explain to the audience about the way in which we have been in and out of the grey list, and the kind of cumulative period we have been in, and the period that we've been out. So therefore, I understand the sustainability is a very, very important element. So, and there is a general perception, Shahzad, that perhaps there is a feeling that that the risk might be significantly reduced because we are out of the grey list now. So obviously we can take a sigh of relief, and we can probably pull back the accelerators. Now, question to you is, how can we ensure that we do have that sustainability built into our culture, in our technology, in our data, in our process, in our people, at the organizational level, Shahzad, and also at the country level? How do you see that unfolding in the future for Pakistan, and what are your suggestions to the industry as a whole?
Thank you for us. First of all, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Delighted to be here with my colleagues, and really would like to thank Telsons, PwC, and other organizers for organizing this fourth summit. Very important topic, especially in light of what's all going on in the country and the fact that we've come out of FATF. And I think I'd like to congratulate all the stakeholders that really made coming out of the grey list, because the consequences of remaining on the grey list are quite dire, and I think we were facing some of that. So I think it was a great collaborative effort between the Government of Pakistan, State Bank of Pakistan, within the banking community, and other regulators to really come together. It really showed and demonstrated that when we put our minds to something as a nation, we can achieve anything and everything. And I think just before I answer your question, echoing what Aurangzeb has just said, I think our economy is going through some very serious challenges. And I think this is the time that we really need to come to a common platform. And that if we don't do it, we will run into some serious risks. There are some serious challenges the banking sector is facing, and we really need all the stakeholders. And through this channel, I'd like to reiterate our concerns, because otherwise we will run into some deep issues, especially with the Ramzan coming up and some of our basic necessities are being stalled at ports and other places. And then I just don't want to be, at that point, the direction should be that the banks did not do their part. Banks are really stepping up as an industry, and we hope and pray that everybody comes together and really addresses the core issues, including the fact that I think it's the IMF program, and not just this program, it's the next IMF program that's, I think, even more critical now. And for that, I think we really need some political stability. So let me pause there on that point. On sustainability of financial, how do we make this sustainable? Look, I think to make this sustainable, we really have to understand that this did not just happen overnight. There was a lot of hard work that went in. And I have two sort of suggestions. One is a very simple one, but we need to be more proactive than reactive. As a nation, as a country, we're very good to react. We are good ambulance chasers, but at times, the times have moved on. I think we really need to be proactive. Proactive means we really need to have risk-based systems and controls in place in our organizations and everywhere where we look around. Again, the basic thrust of that is, first thing is know your customers, as Aurangzeb also mentioned. And with that, understand the risk that customer entails. What is the risk that you are doing? On that basis, understand and really develop your own risk appetite and your risk tolerance. ये इसमें बहुत बड़ा फ़र्क है. एक तो understand the risk that client may have, और दूसरा point जो मैं emphasize कर रहा हूँ is really understand what kind of tolerance you have and what kind of risk appetite you have. There are two different things which I don't think sometimes are taken interchangeably. And I think with that, we need to also, world is moving on very fast. And I think with technology, which the couple of guests of honors also talked about, the President Saab ne bhi uski zikr kiya. I think technology is moving fast and there's lots of things available. RegTech is one of the things, MI, AI, all sorts of things are available which will really make us become much more efficient in how we do it. And I think firms and banks and institutions that are investing in that, I think are the ones that will be able to address this, because again, the data is becoming more and more, analyzing the data on a timely basis and being able to conclude while ensuring that the customer journey and the customer experience does not get compromised. I think you will have to lean on technology and you cannot ignore it. And for that, we also need to create a conducive environment which will require some changes in regulations for which the banks are talking to the regulator and with other stakeholders, whether it's PTA or everybody else. Because again, it's something that requires a collective effort. Early on, it was mentioned about biometrics. Absolutely, but again, how we are able to utilize that biometric, what's the cost of doing that biometric, how closed architecture is that. I think these are things that we need help from all the stakeholders in allowing us to do. And last thing I would just say, it's the mindset and it's the people. I think on that front, you really need to ensure that you have brought this awareness at all levels when it comes to a culture of collaboration. You cannot have just this responsibility of compliance or CISOs to cybersecurity. I think awareness at all levels and having a target operating model which really is agile, and at the same time everybody's playing their role, but also realizing that we have to do it collectively. So whether it's the first line, whether it's the first line with the businesses and the client touching points and operations, or the second line, which is your compliance functions and secondary checks that you have, the enablers that I call it, and the third line, obviously, your internal audit teams. But they all have to work in concert, in collaboration, because the world is moving very fast. And again, having that proactive culture is very important. The second is, again, related to the last point about this collaborative culture, is this whole tone at the top, and again, everybody owning this agenda. So if you have a risk-based controls, proactive versus reactive, and if you have an organization that's really embedding this as a core responsibility of everybody, rather than just ye to business ka kaam hai ya ye to compliance ka kaam hai, you will not succeed. And I think the people around us who are doing these things are becoming smarter and smarter, and we really need to stay one step ahead using all the things, means at our disposal, whether it's technology, whether it's know-how, whether it's data, and the fact that we all need to work together as an industry and as a nation that really wants to avoid it. Because if you don't do this, especially with the way digitization is happening, which we all are playing in our respective organizations and in our respective fields, it's a big agenda, and it's something that is there. Fraud levels will go up, and that will again create some disappointment, which is something that we need to make sure that we avoid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azad. So, I would like to talk to Amir about two things, Amir. Is a correlation between the culture and the accountability. I think probably the Honorable President of Pakistan talked about consciousness, and obviously he also talked about the culture getting associated with the consciousness, the general consciousness of people. The most important thing is that, if you do not have a culture which is an inclusive and a pervasive culture, then it can create problems at any point in time. And in fact, even if you are having hundreds and thousands of control and data points, you'll probably not be able to navigate them for the right compliance culture within an institution. So in that context, generally, what's your suggestions to the banking industry, Amir? How do we sort of integrate the compliance with businesses? That's one part of the question. And also, how do we ensure that the right kind of compliance culture and probably more robust set of accountabilities and framework of responsibilities and accountabilities get created within the institution, which is what we theoretically call as a RSCI metrics. So what are your views on that? And specifically within BankIslami, is there something that you feel that you could be able to share as a success story for the consumption of the audience?
Thank you. So I think to answer a question, the most relevant thing is I will try to share what we have done at BankIslami during the last few years. So first thing which we did about creating a culture, that we decided to start every meeting in BankIslami with a compliance talk, which is do your tilawat and do a compliance talk. And that I adopted from my Shell days. We used to start our meeting with safety talks, because we used to deal with oil, which is very combustible. So we used to start our meetings with safety talk. So we said we are dealing with money, which can be a dirty money, which can be laundered through our system. So we need to build up a culture which is the most hazardous things which we are dealing as a banker is the possibility of dealing with dirty money. So let's start every single meeting with compliance talk. So we started building that culture, and every meeting I used to chair, I start that meeting with a compliance talk. Every other meeting which my colleagues used to chair, they used to start their meeting with a compliance talk. So we started building a culture. So initially people were, I think, thinking that this culture will go away and this is something which we are doing just for a temporary period of time. But when we started doing it on a consistent basis, then all our colleagues who were working outside those control functions like audit, compliance, risks, so they started believing that this is something which is integral part of the business. So it's not something which is a cost on them or which is something which is imposed on them to tax them. So they started believing it is something which we do, which is part of banking. So we started with that. After that, the second thing was, as a couple of other colleagues and Aurangzeb Saab also mentioned, was about the KYC. So we decided that we will do the KYC afresh of all our customers. So there was two models. We were moving to a new system for our KYC and CDD and EDD models. So the one model was the IT had said, okay, we'll transfer the data from our old system to the new system. So it will be a data migration technique and we will be compliant. I said, no, let's take a hard route. We will do KYC of every single customer again. So we started doing that. It took us almost 1.5 years. And it was an exercise when we used to start our management meeting every week. We used to start with that statistics, area by area and region by region, checking how many KYCs has been performed of the existing customers by the branches, how many of these have been reviewed by the centralized account opening team and the compliance team. And every week we used to have an accountability on that. We started building a reward model around that as well, that look, it will be something if you achieve faster, it will be rewarded. So that really worked. Initially, everybody thought that this is something which is not needed. We can easily transfer data from one system to another, but it was my resolve that we have to do it again so that we actually know every single customer afresh. So that was the second thing which at BankIslami we did. And then when we did those two things, although these seems to be more procedural, but they have a very pervasive impact on the culture. Because when we were doing it, we needed to have more people working in compliance. So a compliance team, which then probably was a team of roughly 10 people, grew from 10 people to 70 people, considering the size of BankIslami. So then the people working the business started believing that there is a culture of investing into this function as well. We invested a lot into training, that every week there should be a training of the AML laws, KYC, CDD laws. And I used to personally get connected with the trainer on those weekends. And initially, frankly, there was a situation that 25 people were invited, and I got a call from the trainer saying, or a message on Saturday morning saying that, sir, there are only 7 people in the room in Multan. And then I had to call all the senior management everywhere sitting in the region and in the Multan area. And then people started rushing in because they were feeling that someone sitting at the top is following these training up. So these trainings are no more just tick box or means something like you send anybody from your team who is not doing anything, so that there is a tick on the number of people who have attended the training. So that's entirely transformed the culture of the bank. And then we give a lot of authority to our compliance team. There were situations that because I also came out from a business function. I started my banking in a business function and worked all through in a business function. So I used to get calls from my colleagues working in the business telling that, look, there is a deposit, the compliance team is not opening this account. I used to personally sit down with the compliance team to understand the intricacies of that account. And at number of times we solved those problems and we helped the business team. But a number of times we told them very clearly, look, I have personally seen it, every single document, probably you have not seen it, and it is not doable. So I am not saying that there is a need to do micromanagement on a consistent basis, that some samples or actions of micromanagement led the people to believe that this is important. So creating a culture, it can be created. You cannot create a culture by talking only. You have to walk the talk. So generally, what is the problem with our society is we try to create a culture only by giving a lecture. So lectures don't create cultures. Actions create cultures. So we started taking actions, and that worked at BankIslami. Alhamdulillah. So one most important thing which personally I also learned after getting engaged in this piece of the work was that our understanding of money laundering is very limited. Generally, even as a banker, and I would say as business community, is non-existent. Because when somebody walks into your bank and you ask him or her about his sources of income, his expenses, his outflows and inflows, he or she believes that this is my personal space, how a banker can ask these questions. And this is still prevalent. Sometimes people complain that it takes months or weeks to open an account, but half of the issue created because of those months and weeks that people say, look, I have opened an account 20 years ago in X bank, and now I'm here again to open another account after 20 years. And 20 years ago, that bank never asked me any question. So why are you asking any question? And I have an expired trust deed, so I'm not going to change that trust deed for you. And I'm not going to update it to include the signatories. So then it takes a lot of time. Then bankers should ideally have a right to say no. But to date, I have felt that there are two competing forces which are rightly competing with each other. But the issue is that there is a culture being developed on one side of the continuum, and the culture is missing on the other side of the continuum. Like in the business community, the culture of compliance and the understanding of money laundering is non-existent. And when I initially used to think that the money laundering law is only applicable on banks, then later I learned it's applicable on every single citizen of Pakistan. So the Anti-Money Laundering Act is not restrictive. It's actually applicable on everybody. So the state bank regulations can be only applicable on banks, but the understanding of people on anti-money laundering laws is very limited. The understanding of general public about money laundering is that the money on which they have evaded tax is a black money, and if you wash that money, then it's laundering. But actually, tax evasion is only one crime which leads to an anti-money laundering situation. There are many other predicate offenses which lead to a money laundering situation. So there is a need to create awareness among general public and businesses, telling them, look, these steps of due diligence which a bank is taking is to protect you. Now people have learned that they will not share their ID card copy without crossing it because they know it can be misused. Now people don't share their mobile SIMs with each other. So because people have understood it, what are the repercussions of doing that? Now people have stopped selling their vehicles without getting those transferred in the name of new buyers. Earlier, I remember from my childhood days, we bought a car which was owned by somebody 15, 14 years ago. And then one day we have to transfer it. Then we realize that there are 14 buyers or 10 buyers in between. The car has changed hand. Now the culture is changing on that side. But this awareness, I think there is a need to create awareness, just like cybercrime awareness, which we are creating on the anti-money laundering laws, that look, the money is either originating from a crime. That crime can be a robbery. That crime can be some other form of activity which is harming the society, or that money can be used for another crime, which can be a terrorist activity. So once we create that awareness, then the culture on the other side will also develop, and then this friction which is existing between that the customer wants an account to be opened without telling anything in 30 seconds, and the banks want to do complete due diligence. So I think this friction will continue unless both parties are able to understand the benefits of these practices which are there to actually control crime. So actually, if you look at bank's role, frankly, the bank should not have any role in stopping these crimes, because banks are not law enforcement agencies, but because every crime is either motivated for financial reasons, or there's a crime for which you need financing. So this is a conduit, and the banks have been given this responsibility, which the banks now probably has voluntarily accepted as well. We are not being paid for doing that, frankly, because we have to pay the cost of this activity out of our own earnings. But now the banks have voluntarily accepted it because it's built into the culture. Now, so the reason is, now the banks as a citizen of this society, as a part of this society, have understood that we as an artificial juridical person has to do a role, has to play a role to stop the crime. When we monitor all these financial transactions, we will be able to help the law enforcement agencies to red flag those transactions. Look, probably this appears to be the proceeds of a crime, so that the law enforcement agency can backtrack and then can take actions as per law.
Sure.
Or the proceeds are being used, which is even more dangerous, for some form of crime, which can be a terrorist activity. So if banks have accepted this responsibility, now there is a need for the public at large to understand that responsibility. And before before asking the public to understand, it is more important for businesses to understand that responsibility.
Yes.
So this is my point of view on the creating a culture, and then all the controls which are being built, they cannot be I won't say, we as auditors and accountants says, that no controls give you an assurance which is a complete assurance. It only give you a reasonable assurance. So these controls will only give you a reasonable assurance. But unless you create a culture, even these controls will not be able to, I would say, give that reasonable assurance which we expect from that.
Sure.
So culture is paramount, and for culture, we need to take actions rather than just relying on talks and lectures.
Thank you very much, Amir. I think you very categorically summarized it in a way that culture is the sum of small deeds happening over time. And in Multan, what you did exactly what Sidra did in Karachi just a while ago. So thank you very much for that remembrance. But Ori, you had something to add to what Amir has just mentioned about the bank's role of assuming responsibilities of the financial crime.
I think one thing that I totally agree with him, that the culture has to come from the top, and therefore you have to set the tone from the top. The part which I don't agree with him is that the banks have been crucified in this whole system. Banks have actually a very, very important role as financial intermediaries to ensure that whatever is happening in terms of KYC, AML, sanctions, transaction monitoring does happen, and we have a very important role to play in that. Now, having said that, we need to balance it out, because we all have compliance colleagues here. In the last 4 to 5 years, because the regulations have been coming fast and furious, and therefore we have been adding stuff. What we need to do as banks is to now start balancing this act, because the pendulum has swung on the other side in a huge way. और मैं on a lighter note ये बात करता हूँ कि हमारे जो learning and development center है, वहाँ कायद-ए-आज़म मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना का account opening form, and we are very privileged as HBL कि उन्होंने हमारे साथ account खोला in Mumbai. तो वो एक हमने frame करके उसको रखा हुआ है. आज अगर हम उसको फ्रेम करने की कोशिश करते तो इंशाल्लाह पूरी किताब होती. तो इसलिए we need to, that part I agree with him, we need to sort of balance it out and bring the ease of doing business while we ensure the necessary compliance in the banking system is there, and we need to strike that right balance.
You're absolutely right. FATF compliance journey, there might have been certain extra work that we might have had to carry out, but obviously there is a need for rebalancing of that. Now, one important part, and this was not something that is supposedly to be asked in terms of the money commitment that one could give for financial crime transformation within institutions, Shadad, but I would try and take that question with you. Is there are mostly the concerns around whether we would get the same kind of financial allowances and financial budgets for catering to this issue going forward as well or not, because obviously, as you very well know, there is an inflation attached to the people price, there is an inflation attached to the technology cost. So what's your view, Shadad, in terms of managing this and making sure that the businesses and compliance both are given reasonable budgets to be able to fight financial crime on an ongoing basis?
Thank you, Faraz. I think it's a very easy answer here. The cost of not doing it right is far greater than the cost of doing it right. So investing early on and ensuring that they are partners and they're collaborating. जो मैं पहले बात बता रहा था कि this is a team effort. This cannot be कि यार ये compliance का काम है या ये business का काम है या ये operations का काम है या ये CEO का काम है. We are all in it together, and why are we doing it? We are protecting the institutions that we work for, and more importantly, we're protecting also the data, which I think is right now the most important asset we have. other than so we हमारा सादिक और अमीन हमें कहते हैं on a lighter note is because हम दूसरे लोगों की डिपॉजिट और अमानत हमारे पास है, और वो अमानत डिपॉजिट के साथ साथ एक और जो बड़ी अमानत हमारे पास है वो उनका पर्सनल इंफॉर्मेशन है। और जैसे मेरे कॉलीग्स भी बता रहे थे कि वो हम मांग और रहे हैं, हमारी नीड्स बढ़ती जा रही हैं बिकॉज दैट्स व्हाट द नीड ऑफ द आवर इज, बट बाय सिक्योरिंग दैट डेटा इन अ वेरी वेरी सेफ प्लेस and ensuring that data is not misused either internally by anybody in our organization, which is something we control, or externally. And I think that's what it's important. So the more money we invest in it, but do it prudently, do it intelligently, and do it most efficiently. Sometimes throwing bodies, as Ori was also saying, is not the answer. There are a lot of different technology platforms available that we can rely on, and the world is changing. So we need to really ensure that we avail those services and those resources in the most efficient manner, and always recognize those people who have done the right thing, whether it's on the business side or the compliance side. So if we have any promotion cycles, or if we have any reward cycles, or if anything, we cannot treat two classes of citizen. They're very much part and parcel of the core team, and we will continue to invest in them while we continue to invest in the technology and look at partnership models. I think the banking sector is moving into a different phase. Everything bank ko khud nahi karna. I think there are bunch of fintechs available that are able to provide that services to us in a more cost efficient manner without compromising any of our controls. So lean on those also. So I think there's a lot interesting stuff happening that we can really utilize and make both our banks and the institutions around us all safer. And last point, ek jo hai, on a lighter note again, no, it's not a lighter note. I was in Manhattan. I was on Wall Street when 9/11 happened. And uske baad, as you can imagine, because I work for a financial institution, our institution got totally dismayed in that whole thing. No, it wasn't World Trade, but World Trade ke samne tha. So काफ़ी discussions उसके बाद हुए, and one thing was very simple: follow the money. So when you follow the money, somehow घूम फिर के बैंकों के पास ही आता है, and that's why we need to do our part as part of financial crime and money laundering. So follow the money. का अगर आप philosophy लें तो ये
the very blurred line you have, right?
So for us, you know, we can talk and we can be here till 6 p.m. But if I can just do 30-second intervention, just following up on what Shahzad said. देखिए जो investment है ना, is technology and people, but all of us is incumbent on us to simplify our processes, because we need to do what we need to do, but can we compress the cycles? Can we bring the tax down? And I think that is going to be very critical as we take forward, number one. Number two, at an industry level. So we are making an effort to move towards eKYC. Now, whether we get there or not is a separate discussion. But under the PBA umbrella, we have started that journey in terms of at least creating that functionality.
Yes.
अब उसमें data privacy के issues आएंगे, उसमें state bank के regulations आएंगी, उसमें laws will have to be amended. But if Singapore can do it and they are moving in the right direction, there is no reason why we can't do it, so that we create that ease of doing business for our clients. You know, if they have opened an account with BankIslami, and if they are willing and able to share the same information, they give their consent, and they want to open an account with me or Shahzad, we should be able to take 80% of that data, use that, and then bring in the additional 20% which we need as a bank. So I think that will also bring down the cost curve as we go forward.
Absolutely.
एक बात कह दूं, और you were not here, but representing all three of us. Nadeem is not here, but Nadeem ने कहा business accounts बैंकों में 2-2 महीने लगते हैं. I can at least say about my organization, if all the data is available, we can do it in 3 days. And I can, knowing my colleagues here who I've worked with different point in times, they would have the same. So ये myth है कि बैंकों के पास.
इसमें शहजाद हो सकता है किसी एक जगह हो गया हो इसको सुनकर को वाकया. है ना? So no, this is an important matter to understand. Whether it's a part of the culture, it's an exception that we really need to understand that very clearly. So, but
इसलिए तो मैं clarify कर रहा हूँ भाई.
yeah, absolutely, Shadad, absolutely, and I'm actually trying to support what you're saying. Is that कि 2 महीने किसी भी एक particular account पे लगना थोड़ा सा जो मुझे मुश्किल लगता है, but maybe but thank you very much each and every one of you for your time and for the patient learning each and every one of you. So you just have to bear with me for 15 more minutes, and there you go after lunch. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
May I request this panel to please come together for a photograph, please? Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to our honorable panel. May I request you all to be here. We had, of course, this panel moderated by Syed Faraz Anwar, Mohammad Aurangzeb Sahab, the President and CEO of HPL, Syed Amir Ali, President and CEO BankIslami Pakistan, Shehzad Dada, of course, President and CEO UBL. We'd also like to thank Mr. Muhtashim Ashai, CEO of Suneri Bank, for his contribution. Bahut shukriya. Thank you so much.